Kentucky's Republican Senator Rand Paul, who joins me now. Senator, welcome.
Glad to be with you.
Let me pick up on this point. You have questioned the president's moral leadership at points along the way. Is there an area where you feel you can work in common cause with him this year?
Well, I think the thing we make the mistake of up there is we try to agree to too much. I'm the first to acknowledge the president and I don't agree on every issue. But if you took 10 issues, I think there are 2 or 3 that we agree on and we may agree firmly on. And why don't we go after the issues that we agree on? It's like immigration reform, for example. We don't agree on the whole comprehensive package with the Democrats, but I'll bet you about half of it we agree on. And the question is, are we willing to narrow our focus and go after things that we can agree to and get them done? Or are we going to say so polarized that we always have to have our way or the highway? So I think there is a way to pass legislation. When I was at the White House a couple of weeks ago, I said to the president, I want to increase infrastructure spending, and I know you do. Let's let companies bring back their profit from overseas at 5% and put it all in infrastructure. And I've been talking with Senator Durbin, others in the Senate on the Democrat side. I think we could agree to that tomorrow. But we have to go ahead and just narrow the focus and not say, oh, we're going to do overall tax reform because we don't agree on overall tax reform.
The future of the Republican Party and, frankly, your place in it is a big story. Just this morning, the front page of the New York Times has this headline: Rand Paul's mixed inheritance. Senator looks to move libertarianism from the fringe to the mainstream. How big of a hurdle is this for you if you're going to run for president?
Well, I think there always are perceptions of what is extreme versus what is mainstream. I've always said that, spending what comes in, balancing your budget is actually the very reasonable sort of proposal, and spending $1 trillion you don't have is an extreme proposal. So really it's a matter of getting our message out. But I think it's also, we've been talking a lot about poverty. It's about debating not who wants to cure poverty. Republicans want to help people who are unemployed. We want to help people get jobs, but it's about what policies work. And the reason we don't think government grants work, we spent $1 trillion in the stimulus and they said it was $400,000 per job because you give it to the wrong people. 9 out of 10 businesses fail. So if government picks who they're going to give the money to create jobs, 9 out of 10 times they're wrong and they pick the wrong person. So what I would do, and what I've asked with my economic freedom zones, is dramatically lower taxes, but don't pick who you give it to. Give it to the businesses that are already started and the consumers have already voted for. But that's different than what we've been doing in the war on poverty for 50 years.
But it's interesting, the role of government. You've often referred to the tyranny of the federal government. So again, it comes down to mainstream versus extreme. Fellow Republicans, and maybe he's one that will run against you for the Republican nomination, Ted Cruz, has described your strident libertarianism of your father as an issue that will always be a shadow over anything you try to do.
I think one of the things, and, don't be trashing my dad too much. That's my dad, But the thing is I would say that my dad was extraordinary in Washington, and then being genuine, being really liked by people on both sides, being close to people from the conservative wing of the party, but also very close to the Congressional Black Caucus as well. He went to Berkeley and had 7,000 kids on their feet. He went to Liberty University and had 7,000 people on their 7,000 conservative Christian kids on their feet. So that's a rare figure in politics, and I would say I'm proud of my dad. And what I would say I'm trying to do is to try to bring that message to an even bigger crowd.
But Senator, do you think
so I think there's a lot to be said for it.
Is the federal government guilty of tyranny?
Well, Montesquieu talked about when the executive branch tries to assume the legislative powers, that's a form of tyranny. So, yeah, there are times when we lose our checks and balances, when government grows, and when government's not obeying the rule of law, that is a form of tyranny. Tyranny is a strong word, but it makes people sit up and take notice. But I would say that there are times when we are going beyond what we should be doing, when we're exceeding the restraints of the Constitution, that there is a form of tyranny, and we need to be aware of that.
But it's interesting, in the issue of Edward Snowden, who's been very much in the news this week with calls potentially for a deal with the United States government, you've called him a hero. You've said that perhaps he would face penalties that would be too harsh, and that's why he's not returning. The Wall Street Journal editorialized...
Actually,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's not exactly what I've said. I've said that I have sort of mixed feelings. I think he's brought forward something, and I think his motives are noble in the sense that I think he believed the government was doing something unconstitutional, and he was bringing this information forward. And I don't think we'd have any of this debate over the NSA had he not done it. But I've also said what he did was against the law, and that we do have to have laws to protect national secrets. You know, captains in the military, sergeants in the military, we do have to obey orders, and we can't reveal secrets. So I haven't said that he shouldn't be punished. I've just said that the death penalty is excessive, life imprisonment is excessive, and that he has brought forward a very important debate.
So what would you call on the Attorney General?
Of war.
What would you call on the Attorney General, the President, to do in terms of fashioning some kind of plea with him? What would be appropriate?
I'm not sure what the answer is. I've been responding not so much in a legal fashion, but I'm responding to some, I think, overheated rhetoric by people saying, let's string him up, let's shoot him, he's a traitor, this and that. I don't assign bad motives to Snowden. I think his motives were good. I'm not sure he did the right thing or did it in the right way. But I also don't assign bad motives to James Clapper. But James Clapper did break the law, and he exposed himself to 5 years in prison for perjury. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, oh, we're going to throw the book at Snowden and we're going to ignore perjury to Congress by James Clapper. I think they both, if you want to apply the law has to be applied equally.
What about your colleagues, the chairs of the intelligence committees, namely Mike Rogers in the House, strongly suggesting that Snowden on this program last week was a spy for the Russians, that he had help from the Russians, that he went into the open arms of the Russians to seek refuge there? How do you react to that? Do you think that's fair?
You know, I don't have details to know, you know, what the situation is there. I think it's complicated the way history will treat him, because it's a little hard to be over there in Russia talking about privacy and the Bill of Rights in a country that has persecuted journalists and doesn't really have the same degree of freedom that we have in our country. So it has complicated it. And but I don't know whether or not what he's released and exactly what they're referring to.
Let me ask you more about some of the debates within the Republican Party. Former candidate Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas, got in some hot water this week with comments he made. I'll play a portion of it as he talked about a war for women. Here's what he said.
The Democrats want to insult the women of America by making them believe that they are helpless without Uncle Sugar coming in and providing for them a prescription each month for birth control, because they cannot control their libido or their reproductive system without the help of the government. Then so be it. Let us take that discussion all across America, because women are far more than the Democrats have played them to be.
Is this helpful?
Well, you know, I think we have a lot of debates in Washington that get dumbed down and are used for political purposes. This whole sort of war on women thing, I'm scratching my head, because if there was a war on women, I think they won. You know, the women in my family are incredibly successful. I have a niece at Cornell Vet School, and 85% of the young people there are women. In law school, 60% are women. In med school, 55%. My younger sister's an OBGYN with 6 kids and doing great. You know, I don't see so much that women are downtrodden. I see women rising up and doing great things. And in fact, I worry about our young men sometimes, because I think the women really are out competing the men in our world.
But my question about whether you think it's appropriate for the party, key figures in the party, to be talking about women, women's health, women's bodies, and the role of the federal government related to those things.
I try never to have discussions of anatomy unless I'm at a medical conference. But what I would say is that we didn't start this sort of, I think, glossy and sometimes dumbed down debate about, you know, there being a war on women. I think the facts show that women are doing very well, have come a long way. And, you know, like I say, I have a lot of successful women in my family, and I don't hear them saying, oh, woe is me, this terrible, you know, misogynist world. They look out and they're conquering the world. The women in my family are doing great, and that's what I see in all the statistics coming out. I have, you know, young women in my office that are the leading intellectual lights of our office. So I don't really see this, that there's some sort of war that's keeping women down. I see women doing great, and I think we should extol that success and not dumb it down into a political campaign that somehow one party doesn't like women or that. And I think that's what's happened. It's all been for political purposes.
Elsewhere in Republican politics, Chris Christie, of course, in New Jersey, is facing troubles over the bridge scandal there, and you've had your own feud with him. Here's a little bit of tape that brings people up to date on that.
This strain of libertarianism that's going through both parties right now and making big headlines, I think is a very dangerous thought.
If he cared about protecting this country, maybe he wouldn't be in this gimme, 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 gimme all the money you have in Washington.
Maybe he should start looking at cutting the pork barrel spending that he brings home to Kentucky, but I doubt he would. Because most Washington politicians only care about bringing home the bacon so that they can get reelected.
This is the king of bacon talking about bacon.
I understand you two have been working through some of your feud, but my question for you is, do you think that Chris Christie could get the Republican nomination?
I think that's yet to be determined. The nomination goes through some very conservative primaries. I think there's room for more moderate Republicans in the party, and I really am a believer that we should have an expansive and diverse party, ideologically and diverse in many ways. But the primary is a very conservative process, and my understanding is that it'll be more difficult for a moderate to make it through because we truly are fiscal conservatives in our party. We don't want to spend money we don't have. If we are going to spend something on such as Sandy, which is, I think, something the country was going to take a responsibility in, we think we should pay for it. I offered an amendment on Sandy to take the money from foreign aid and say, look, we don't need to, if we're going to repair bridges in New Jersey, I'm fine with that. And if we're going to repair houses and roads, but let's take it from repairing roads in Pakistan because there's a limited amount of money. And actually, really, we're borrowing about $1 million a minute, a lot of it from China and Japan. I don't think we should do that. And we need to set priorities and say if we're going to help New Jersey, it ought to be paid for. But that's why I think that there was a debate over him sort of lecturing Congress and saying, gimme, gimme, gimme all this money. And all I was asking for, and many other Republicans were asking for, is that it ought to be paid for through spending cuts in overseas spending.
Final political question for you. Whoever the Republican nominee is, there's a good chance, as we look at it now, that one candidate on the Democratic side will have a lot of momentum. Whether she gets the nomination or not, we don't know, is Hillary Clinton. And an interesting profile in Vogue magazine, including this analysis. While her husband jokes, meaning you, that his gut feeling is that Hillary Clinton will not run for president is a good thing, since all the polls show her trouncing any opponents, Kelly, the wife of Senator Rand Paul, practically cuts him off to say that Bill Clinton's relationship with Monica Lewinsky should complicate his return to the White House, even as first spouse. I would say his behavior was predatory, offensive to women, she tells me. Are these issues something that you really think will be fair game and an appropriate part of a campaign should she be the nominee?
Well, the Democrats, one of their big issues is they've concocted and says Republicans are committing a war on women. One of the workplace laws and rules that I think are good is that bosses shouldn't prey on young interns in their office. And I think really the media seems to have given President Clinton a pass on this. He took advantage of a girl that was 20 years old and an intern in his office. There is no excuse for that, and that is predatory behavior, and it should be something we shouldn't want to associate with people who would take advantage of a young girl in his office. This isn't having an affair. This isn't me saying, oh, he's had an affair, we shouldn't talk to him. Someone who takes advantage of a young girl in their office, really. And then they have the gall to stand up and say Republicans are having a war on women. So, yes, I think it's a factor. Now, it's not Hillary's fault.
But it should be an issue.
But it is a factor in judging Bill Clinton in history.
Right, but is it something that Hillary Clinton should be judged on if she were a candidate in 2016?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. This was with regard to the Clintons, and sometimes it's hard to separate one from the other. But I would say that with regard to his place in history, that it certainly is a discussion. And I think in my state, people tend to sort of frown upon that. We wouldn't be, if there was someone in my community who did that, they would be socially, we would disassociate from somebody who would take advantage of a young woman in the workplace.
All right, Senator Rand Paul, a lot of ground covered, a lot of ground still to cover, and we'll hope to have you back. Senator, thank you as always.
Thank you.
I want to turn